On day 14 of this conflict, Mr. Secretary, day 14, nearly 5 months ago, you stated that Iran's military had been, quote, destroyed and, quote, made combat ineffective. That was on day 14 of the war. Was that an accurate statement?
They didn't have a Navy any longer. It was completely sunk. Their missiles were buried underneath a lot of their underground facilities, and their defense industrial base has been almost completely destroyed. So as far as a military assessment of Iran's capabilities, it didn't mean by any stretch of the imagination absolute zero, but their capabilities
Mr. Secretary,
at the lowest level
you
they've been in a
stated
very
that
long time.
on day 14 of this conflict, in the second week of the conflict, you stated that Iran's military had been, quote, destroyed and, quote, made combat ineffective. Was that an accurate statement? Yes or no?
Iran's ability to challenge the United States of America at the level at which we're capable of.
That's not what I asked you, Mr. Secretary. You said on day 14, Iran's military had been, quote, destroyed and, quote, made combat ineffective. Yes or no? Was that an accurate statement?
What the American military has done to the
question?
Iranian military is a historic military
Will you
defeat,
answer the
and
question
they're ineffective
under oath?
in that context.
3 weeks later, you declared victory. That was now nearly 4 months ago. 3 weeks after you'd already said Iran's military was destroyed and combat ineffective, you said, quote, Operation Epic Fury was a historic and overwhelming victory. You said Iran's military had been rendered, quote, combat ineffective for years to come. And you stated we had, quote, achieved every single objective. Were those accurate statements?
It certainly was, on behalf of the men and women in uniform, a historic military victory over Iran.
Had Iran's military been rendered, quote, combat ineffective for years to come? That was a statement that you made 4 months ago.
They had 160 naval vessels
in the
Blue Water
questions,
Navy,
Mr.
and they're gone.
Secretary.
Their Air Force is completely combat ineffective, and they don't have a defense industrial base. So describe to me a country that doesn't have an Air Force, a Navy, or a defense industrial base, and I will describe to you a country that does not have an effective military. It can lob missiles.
Mr. Secretary, you stated 4 months ago that Iran's military had been rendered, quote, combat ineffective for years to come. Has Iran's military been, for the last 4 months, combat ineffective?
It's been set back not just years, but likely decades.
You stated we had, quote,
build at the level it did before, and not even close. It doesn't mean it doesn't have capabilities.
Mr. Secretary, you stated we had, quote, achieved every single objective. Was that an accurate statement 4 months ago?
The main objective of this was to ensure that Iran never gets a nuclear weapon. Their main sites were obliterated. We're watching over them, and we're holding that issue. If they don't give them up at the table, there's other ways we can take them away.
Early in the conflict
Iran will
on
never
day
have a
3,
nuclear
Mr.
weapon.
Secretary, early in the conflict, day 3, you said one of those core objectives was to, quote, destroy the missile threat, and as you restated on day 5, to, quote, obliterate Iran's missiles and drones. Those were clearly and repeatedly stated core objectives of the campaign, which 4 months ago you declared had been completed victoriously with every single objective achieved. Were those objectives achieved 4 months ago?
No one ever stated that every single missile was gone. Ultimately, combat ineffective means they're not able to dig them out of their UGFs and shoot at us.
Had the missile threat
It doesn't mean they
been
don't
defeated
have underground
4 months
facilities
ago?
where they put missiles in them and hold on to them because they're the world's largest state sponsor of terrorism. So we never expected they would stop having capabilities to shoot. The question is at scale against an opponent like the United States of America, which went toe-to-toe with them, and Iran couldn't.
You stated on March 8th, day 9 of the war, on 60 Minutes, you assured the American people of Iranian surrender. Does that remain your prediction?
Ultimately, Iran will never have a nuclear weapon to threaten the United States of America. That has been the objective, and it remains so.
So just to review, you will not answer whether your statement made on the 14th day of the war that Iran's military had been, quote, destroyed and made combat ineffective was a truthful statement to the American people as you sit here and ask for tens of billions more for the conflict.
Senator's time has
Had a
expired.
historic and effective military campaign against the largest state sponsor of terrorism.
Won't answer the question.
They never
Senator
get a nuclear weapon,
Peters
Senator.
Wait, did anyone else notice what just happened? Because this wasn't just another heated exchange in Congress. This was a moment that left millions of Americans asking a very simple question. If everything is going according to plan, why does the story keep changing? Think about it. First, we were told Iran's nuclear program had been crippled. Then, more military action followed. Then the focus shifted to Iran's military. Then it became protecting shipping lanes. Every few months, the explanation seems to change, but somehow we're always told the mission is a success. Now, military strategy is complex, and governments often adjust their objectives as events unfold. But when the public hears different explanations over time, it's understandable that people begin asking tough questions. And that's exactly why today's hearing mattered. Instead of carefully walking Americans through the facts, the hearing turned into a clash of talking points, interruptions, and competing narratives. Supporters say Secretary Hegseth was defending a difficult mission under intense political pressure. Critics argue he relied more on forceful rhetoric than clear explanations. Here's what should concern everyone, regardless of political party. When American troops are deployed, when taxpayer dollars are being spent, and when the possibility of a wider regional conflict exists, the public deserves more than slogans. They deserve honest answers, clear objectives, and a transparent explanation of what success actually looks like. Because history has taught us that the hardest questions often aren't asked when a conflict begins. They're asked months or years later when people start wondering why the mission is still ongoing. So before anyone declares victory or declares failure, let's examine what was actually said, what is supported by the available evidence, and what questions remain unanswered. Because the next part of this hearing may completely reshape how you view this entire debate. Stay with us.
The destruction of missiles, and yet the missiles that we saw hit recent targets are actually somehow more lethal, more deadly, more maneuverable than what we have seen in the past. So they're obviously improving their munitions. The Strait of Hormuz is still closed, reminding everybody it was open before the war. Prices were lower for everybody until the war, and it still remains closed. And of course, tragically, people, service members, our warfighters, who we care deeply about, are still dying. So what's different? Mr. Hegseth, Secretary Hegseth.
I think your characterization of this incredible effort as a failure is reckless. And I think it's irresponsible. And I think it smears the sacrifice of the troops that are out there making on behalf of the American people to ensure that Iran never gets a nuclear weapon. Shame on you and others who call this a quagmire and a failure, and then you want to turn around and say you support the warfighter. Either you do or you don't.
Is the nuclear material still there,
I can
sir?
get you a ticket out to CENTCOM and talk to what those Americans are doing, and how committed they are to this effort, and how they want to ensure that Iran never threatens their families with a nuclear weapon. That's the kind of intensity that our warfighters have about making sure that Iran isn't capable of doing that.
Secretary Hegseth, if you listen to my comments, you would have heard me say how amazing our warfighters are.
I heard failure. And the word heard, I heard exactly what you said.
I will tell you how I use the word failure, because I use the word failure to their leaders. You, sir, are the failure, not the men and women who are on that front line, not the men and women who hold up their honor with distinction. But if there's a lack of a winning strategy, they're in harm's way. Their leaders have failed them. And that's what's happening. We have political leadership. You don't have a strategy. You don't have a long-term plan to actually win this war. Win the war. The men and women are going to be able to do it, but they need to have leadership. When will you show leadership? Of course we have leadership. When will you show leadership? Why don't you show some leadership and stand up to your fellow Democrats who won't fund the troops, who stand and play partisan politics while you don't give us the money? You want to stand up here and talk about the troops? You won't show any political courage to actually fund our department because you have Trump derangement syndrome and can't actually commit to anything meaningful. So I put this on you, Senator. Secretary Hegseth, you have trillions, you have over $1 trillion, you're asking for $1.5 trillion. It's not a question of money, it's a question of leadership and understanding what it takes to...
What should Americans expect from their leaders when it comes to war? Regardless of whether you're a Republican, Democrat, independent, or someone who's simply exhausted by politics, one principle should never be controversial. The American people deserve clear answers when their government commits military force overseas. Today's hearing wasn't just about Pete Hegseth. It wasn't just about one tense intense exchange in Congress. It was about accountability. Supporters of the administration argue that military conflicts are unpredictable. They point out that objectives evolve as intelligence changes, alliances shift, and conditions on the ground develop. From that perspective, adapting strategy isn't a sign of failure, it's part of military leadership. Critics see it differently. They argue that when the public hears one explanation for military action, only to hear a different explanation months later, confidence begins to erode. They believe Americans deserve a consistent understanding of what the mission is, how success is measured, and when that mission will end. That's why hearings like this matter. They're one of the few opportunities where senior officials have to explain their decisions in front of the American people, not through campaign speeches or carefully produced television appearances, but under questioning from elected representatives. And whether you agreed with Pete Hegseth's answers or not, this hearing clearly demonstrated one thing. The debate over America's role in the Middle East is far from over. History has taught us that military victories aren't judged only by powerful speeches or press conferences. They're judged by results. They're judged by whether objectives are achieved. They're judged by whether service members can return home safely. They're judged by whether the American people believe the sacrifices made were necessary and worthwhile. Those are difficult questions, and they don't have simple answers. That's why it's so important to separate political rhetoric from verified facts. In today's world, social media rewards the loudest voices. Cable news rewards the biggest confrontation. Politicians reward their own supporters. But none of those things automatically bring us closer to the truth. The truth comes from asking difficult questions, examining evidence, listening to different perspectives, and being willing to challenge our own assumptions. Whether you believe this administration is making the right decisions or the wrong ones, democracy depends on informed citizens who demand transparency, not blind loyalty to any political party or public official. Because at the end of the day, administrations change, political parties change, cabinet officials come and go, but the consequences of military decisions can last for generations. That's why these conversations matter. That's why these hearings matter. And that's why Americans continue paying attention. Now I'd like to hear from you. Do you believe the administration has clearly explained its military objectives in Iran? Or do you think today's hearing raised more questions than it answered? Leave your opinion in the comments below. Whatever your perspective, keep the discussion respectful and based on the facts. Healthy debate is one of the strongest parts of any democracy. If you enjoyed this analysis and want more in-depth coverage of the biggest political stories in America, don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you never miss our latest videos. Your support helps us continue producing independent political analysis and covering the stories that shape the national conversation. Thank you so much for watching. Stay informed, stay engaged. Take care of yourselves and each other, and I'll see you in the next video.